It's that weird time of year again, the only informal horror holiday that not only bounces around the calendar, but also has a variable occurrence between 1 and 3 times per year, Friday the 13th. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to explore what is probably the most well-known horror franchise of all time, Friday the 13th. Welcome everyone to the Graveyard. My name is Cody, and I'll be your Graveskeeper this evening. In a franchise of 12 movies, including one remake, a soon-to-be TV franchise, and an outer space adventure, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about what I think is the best one. And unlike when that one dude interrupted the Game Awards, Bill Clinton is not in the running. There is some decent competition amongst the fan base as to which film is the best. Parts 2, 4, the final chapter, and of course the original are often mentioned. I've even heard Freddy vs. Jason named for the good use of its massive budget. However, my nominee for this award goes to Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. I must admit, I cannot be considered a Friday the 13th superfan, as I generally prefer Halloween or the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but I will easily watch Part 6 over a lot of the movies in those franchises just because it's so much fun to watch. The film, released in 1986, was both written and directed by Tom McLoughlin, who didn't have any standout work at the time. In fact, he had only written and directed one film prior, One Dark Night, a fairly campy horror film that didn't even receive an R rating, but was moderately successful, and I think he did a fantastic job despite his lack of experience. He was really only given one main order: bring Jason back. Part 5 was largely panned by the fan base because of a whodunit plot that straight up did not work, and I myself count Part 5 as one of the worst films in the series. So the producers wanted to take the series back to basics and bring Jason back, but other than that, just about anything and everything was up for discussion. Before I list the reasons I enjoy the film, I'd like to reemphasize that this is, of course, only my opinion. My word is not gospel. You're free to have your own favorite, but here are a few reasons Jason Lives is mine. Firstly, the movie is actually pretty funny. Sure, the first 4 films had their elements of humor, such as the Shelley character in Part 3, but they overwhelmingly took themselves seriously. In part, this was because Jason was an actual normal human going around murdering other humans. It's a naturally serious topic. Part 5 was funny, but maybe not in the best of ways. It was more funny weird than anything else, like that random trailer park discount Michael Jackson dude who has a diarrhea attack during Jason's rampage.
Some damn enchiladas!
I found myself laughing more at Part 5 than with it. The horror in the first 5 parts strikes me as ultimately uneven. Some of it's okay, but it's clear that the best parts of these films are those that play it straight rather than for laughs. I don't think that's automatically true with Jason Lives, as both the serious and humorous moments share an equal chance of success. Part 6's humor is derived from self-awareness, both of itself as a franchise and the horror genre as a whole. The film makes no attempt to hide that it strikes a more parody-toned note, as the first image of Jason the viewer sees after his resurrection is him aping the opening of the James Bond films, but with a machete instead of a gun. Similarly, the movie sets the overall tone by making one of the first major plot points Jason's resurrection by lightning strike. This early scene serves 2 purposes. First, it pays homage to early horror with a Frankenstein reference, and secondly, to prepare the audience to shelve their disbelief for the century. Jason is no longer a normal serial killer that could plausibly exist. Realism is right out the window, and now he's a supernatural mega killer, ripping out people's hearts, folding them in half, cutting through 3 heads at once, and shoving someone's face into the side of an RV so hard that it imprints their face, just to name a few kills. There's a juxtaposition of the seriousness of the characters with the silliness of the situation that results in some very entertaining moments that convey both humor and horror simultaneously. These are not realistic kills in any sense, but they are just as fun to watch as any of the others in the series, and reminds us that Jason is still a force to be reckoned with even after his death. Hell, it's arguable that the least realistic kills are the most fun. The Sub-Zero head smash in Jason X remains a standout kill in the franchise. The film does attempt some meta-analysis, as the members of the cast and the audience watching the film are deliberately put on the same wavelength. In the film, Camp Crystal Lake has been renamed Camp Forest Green, and the town has gone to great lengths to hide that Jason ever existed. So for most of the characters, Jason is just some fictional character made up to scare children and sell tickets, exactly what he is in our world. So when scenes like this play out...
Darren, we better turn around.
Why?
Because I've seen enough horror movies to know any weirdo wearing a mask is never friendly.
we can better relate to them. what would we do if we were driving along and this dude just showed up? Probably not invite him to play Smash Brothers, in part because Mario Kart's better anyways. Scream's writer Kevin Williamson stated that this film would go on to influence the self-aware campiness of Scream 10 years later. Ultimately, my favorite change is a massive one that really makes the movie work. In Part 6, Camp Crystal Lake is actually a fully functioning summer camp this time around. In other words, the camp counselors aren't just worrying about their own skin, they also have to find a way to keep Jason away from the kids. That it took until the 6th movie to do this is kinda baffling, and in a lot of ways it feels like this is closer to what the first movie should have entailed. This setting better defines the line between good and evil and gives the movie a lot more tension to work with. Obviously, the audience is going to care if kids die because they're naturally more naive and innocent than some sex-crazed counselors. But it also makes you care more about the counselors as well because they're defending the kids. They're not just Jason fodder, their actions aren't guided purely by self-interest. There's also an angle of virtue to them. If they die, it's likely the kids will die also. It also casts Jason as blatantly more evil because, well, hey, he might kill the kids. Having actual campers in the film changes the dynamics of the second half of the film in a big way compared to the previous films, creating more of an actual good versus evil dynamic where you can root for the good guys while still enjoying Jason's kills. As a side note, this film was likely the inspiration for the setting of the Friday the 13th video game developed by Atlas for the NES, as one of the game's mechanics is to save children from Jason. Lastly, the film does a lot with its money. The budget isn't significantly larger than the previous films, but it sure feels like it. One of the scenes in this film involves Jason killing someone driving an RV, and it looks pretty spectacular, as Jason stands triumphant atop the burning wreckage. Events and kills like this hadn't really been seen before in the series and wouldn't become common until the later films with larger budgets came into play. Freddy vs. Jason reigns supreme in this area with its $30 million budget. Those are just the primary reasons I enjoy it. There are also some more minor ones. The cinematography is well done, always working to portray Jason as just around the corner, and he always feels threatening when he's on screen. Speaking of, the actor for Jason this time around, CJ Graham, is a former US Marine whose movements have a militaristic, mechanical quality to them. Every movement feels precise, giving Jason this aura of being a literal killing machine, like he's some kind of early model Terminator. And yet, he's also able to infuse the character with a bit of emotion at times, despite us literally being unable to see his face. Lastly, this is of course the final part of the so-called Jarvis trilogy, which is composed of parts 4, 5, and 6, all of which include the character Tommy Jarvis as a protagonist. For those who are unaware, Tommy Jarvis is the closest Jason gets to having his own Laurie Strode, and the final fight on the water, surrounded by flames, is fittingly grand. Just as the film opens with a reference to Universal films, it also closes with one that feels very gothic. It feels like Jason is Frankenstein's monster and Tommy Jarvis has just lit the flames of all the villagers who want to run him out of town, as they've actually tried to do metaphorically by erasing him from history. As stated before, all this is just my viewpoint, and it's certainly not a perfect film. The comedy absolutely will seem over the top for some. Furthermore, the idea that in fewer than 10 years Jason would go from being a well-known fact to a legend requires a lot of imagination, or at the very least the assumption that everyone in Forest Green is suffering from early-onset Alzheimer's. Also, despite Tommy Jarvis showing complete and utter dedication to the destruction of Jason, he simply never comes back, ever. Despite Jason becoming pretty well known for being still alive by films 8 and 9, or well, a zombie anyways. It makes it feel like he was supposed to die in this film as some kind of heroic sacrifice to take down Jason, but they rewrote the ending at the last minute or something. I'm also aware that many consider nudity a staple of the series, and 6 is the first and only film to feature none whatsoever. Even during the film's one sex scene, the woman keeps her shirt on, and that's going to be anathema to some Friday the 13th fans. Ultimately, that's all fine. All those criticisms are valid. But I guess my threshold for what makes a Friday the 13th film is fairly bare bones. I'm easy to please, I just want to see Jason do some fun kills. And putting him in a functional camp makes it all the more interesting. Back when I was watching through all the films for the first time, 6 became my favorite the moment the credits started rolling. So to wrap this up, if you haven't watched Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives in a while, consider giving it a rewatch this Friday the 13th, or perhaps a first watch. It's an excellent movie, despite what critics may think, that I think you won't regret watching. Until the next video, I am Cody, this is The Graveyard, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your evening.